Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another U.S. 2022 midterm election update. So, what has changed? Let's start from the top, west to east. So, Washington and Oregon are slightly more Democrat in vote percentage. Notably, Washington is now no longer like margin of error popular vote wise. Hasn't affected seats yet, but if it keeps drifting, it might affect seats in the near future. Nevada is slightly drifting the other way, though not very significantly. The Dems lost a seat in California, but it's close, so it's probably going to be bouncing back and forth until election day, depending on the polls. New Mexico has also drifted slightly more Dem, but not meaningfully. Going over to, let's see, where's the next spot? Minnesota is slightly less Republican now, both in popular vote, and the Dems are picking up another seat. I personally think the last update was a bit anomalous for Minnesota, and I think this is actually a much more realistic result. But we'll see going forward. It might keep moving back and forth because there's been some quite aggressive polls for the Midwest for the Republicans. I'm really skeptical that they'll sweep everything but Illinois. We'll see. I'll get to Illinois in a second. Skipping past Illinois momentarily, we get to Mississippi, which is now slightly less Republican, not meaningfully. It's not going to affect the election at all. The only Dem seat there is Super Dem, and the other three Republican seats are Super Republican, so it doesn't matter. The Dems have gained a seat in Pennsylvania. Again, I suspect that was probably always going to be their seat, and the specificities of weird pollingness caused that outcome in particular. And they've also picked up another seat in New York. Again, I think likely the same thing. So this brings us finally to Illinois. So I've been doing a project since the last update to change how I'm handling Illinois' congressional districts based off of what commenters, really it's one particular commenter, forgive me, I don't know your name, off the top of my head, I don't have the time to pull this up. I'm already recording this late enough in the evening, and I don't really want to do more work before this. I spent all day working on this, well, sort of. Finishing this up. So basically, all of the states right now are going through redistricting. Some states, like the Dakotas, it literally doesn't matter. They have one district, whatever. A lot of states, like Kansas, it doesn't really change anything. There's some mucking around with borders, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. And a first-order approximation of the previous districts is a close enough thing, and that's typically how that works. The areas where this starts falling apart, where you need to start doing second or third-order approximations, because given my resources, I can't actually get a proper picture of what the district's demographic profiles are until the election has passed and the U.S. Congress Data Center or whatever publishes them. But after they publish them, the election has occurred, so I can't use them. Going forward for 2024 or future elections, I will have that data and I can improve the accuracy of the model. But until then, I don't have the data, and I don't have the man hours to actually get a proper estimate. I can only get a first or second or third order approximation manually. Now, a third order approximation manually is taking the counties and doing some guess and checking by mapping the county demographic profiles onto the districts. There is guessing and checking, though, because in the case of Illinois, for Clark County, there's 10 different districts that split through Clark County. 10. There's no objective way with the data I have access to actually get a real answer there. I can get a close approximation, but I can't get the real answer. So a lot of these districts, it doesn't matter. Arkansas, again, doesn't matter. Oklahoma doesn't matter. States where it does matter, and I'm slowly trying to work through this. This is a lot of work, and I'm one person, so forgive me. If this was my entire channel's thing was doing U.S., maybe I could do it, but, well. So Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, lesser extent, not West Virginia, because West Virginia is so safe, Republican doesn't matter. Pennsylvania, New York, and California are all losing seats. So that does mean that is actually more important to do reapproximations of. Places like Texas and Florida are gaining seats. Oh, and Oregon and Colorado, which also makes getting a second or third order approximation more important for those. I picked Illinois to do first just because it has it doesn't have too many counties. It only has 101. Places like Texas have a ridiculous amount of counties. One particular commenter really was concerned about the Illinois numbers, and you know what? Even with my second or third order approximation of what the district should be, he was right. It did change things. I ran the numbers earlier today, and with the old numbers for Illinois, the Republicans had one more seat in Illinois. You change the districts, the Democrats have gained a seat. Not surprising, there's been some heavy gerrymandering just for the fact that Clark County has 10 different districts cut into it, and then cut out and take a bunch of surrounding suburb and or rural areas. And this isn't to say that Democrats are the only ones to do this. Literally everyone in the U.S. does this pretty much, but it makes my job harder. If they stuck nicely to county borders, it'd be easy. Now, mind you, you couldn't stick nicely to county borders in Clark County because it has like something silly like 1.6 million people or whatever. All per district of 1.6 million in Illinois would be a bit unfair. So, anyways, what has all this to say is I am going through and making district maps better-ish. I don't think it's drastically changing the results of the model. I think even if we update, or I had the resources and time to update every single map in every single state, all like something stupid like 50 or 30,000 counties or whatever, even if I did that, I think we're only talking about a couple of states, or a couple of seats, like less than 5. So I might do a couple more states, but this is actually, after doing Illinois, it is a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. It'll be probably less work going forward because I had to write a bunch of code specifically to actually get this to work. I now have the code, so I don't need to write it again, so it might be easier going forward. But there's still, the biggest issue was mapping the counties to electoral districts and then massaging the mapping so the districts have roughly correct population numbers. Because that's the only way I can check it. And there is the other problem there is counties aren't monolithic. You'll have a county where the city is very Democrat and the rural areas are very Republican. I can't fix that in my third order approximation. It is what it is. So, you get what you get. I'm doing my best, but blame the fact that the U.S. apparently doesn't post new data for this. I'm dreading actually that when Canada redistricts next year that we might have the exact same problem in Canada. And if that's the case, I'll be very sad. Because this is a lot more work than I thought it was going to be to update maps when I don't actually have a authoritative source to pull the demographics from. And the most important of these demographics is historical voting trends. I hope the tiredness of my voice here is conveying how much work this was. We'll see going forward. I think this particular, just updating Illinois, I think took 10 hours of my time. And considering I don't get paid for this, that's pretty brutal. Now, back to US as a whole, and enough of me complaining that they don't publish demographic data nicely. Though I will note, in general, US actually publishes pretty much every form of publicly collected data better than Canada, so there's that. Americans, you have better data. So, where are we overall? So, we look over here, and since the last update, which was 24th of July, the race has closed a little bit, about a percentage point, let's say. The last 2 weeks, it hasn't changed. These are statistically the same. And in fact, most of the sub numbers are the same, except the Midwest, where the Democrats have gained a bit of ground, and Northeast, where the Republicans have gained a bit of ground. Not that surprising. Seat totals, whatever, they haven't really changed. Even by region, nothing's really changed. Apparently, I have somehow put the wrong numbers here, so this is apparently saying there's 2 less seats in the U.S., whatever. Or is this one saying there's 2 more? I don't know. I don't feel like doing the maths. There's something wrong here. So, but that doesn't really matter. This is a 0th order approximation of seat totals, whereas this is the 3rd order approximation that my model, or this is what my model projects, and this is a 1st order approximation. So basically, if you just naively looked at popular vote numbers, this is kind of what you get. And if you do more complicated math stuff, which what my model does, this is what you get. And this is why you don't just do popular vote, by the way, because these are farcical numbers. So that's what we got as baseline factual things. So the race is tightening a little bit, but I don't think it's really consequential. I think it's tightening in the sense that a lot of the big issues that drove the big Republican lead are starting to fatigue people. So and it's the middle of the summer, literally, people aren't paying as much attention. Things like COVID are winding down, which the CDC recently just basically ended their rules or their suggestion to handle a lot of these things, most notably the treating vaccinated and unvaccinated for COVID populations differently. That guidance is no longer supported by the CDC. At least to my understanding at the time of recording this video. I don't really follow the CDC very heavily, but things like that are winding down, and I think that is pulling some impetus out of the Republican sails. Some people are pointing to things like Roe still. No, I'm sorry, guys, stop. Roe isn't helping the Democrats. It's not. Since Roe not being overturned, there's literally been no change in polling on the polls I've seen on how Americans view the issue as a whole. It hasn't changed. And in fact, actually, the pro-life / Republican side is more enthused. The pro-overturning Roe side is more enthusiastic to vote, so it might actually help Republicans there. But anyways, I think it's super minor. What I think is more interesting that has happened recently, and I'm sure anyone who's watching this hasn't escaped this. If you somehow are watching a tiny, niche little channel like mine covering hypothetical election results, and you haven't heard this news, you're living under a rock. So the big news recently is Trump's residence at Mar-A-Lago was raided by the FBI over allegations of having classified documents, it seems. I don't want to really say any factual statements on that or my opinions on that because I don't really know. I don't follow it super closely. And it's not terribly relevant what is true about it. The important thing about this event is it's going to make Republicans more likely to vote in the long term. You look at the polling on it, and there's already some polling on it. Wow. The actual headline polls haven't had any chance to reflect on this. The most recent polls are from August 7th, so they're a week. Will be probably another update before we have any inkling of how this might have affected polling. But I can tell you, polling isn't the same as voting. My model doesn't just consider polls, it also considers historical voting trends and historical polling error, which is why my model is actually more aggressive with Republicans than the polling aggregates are, because the polls in the US are typically overestimating the Democrats, like across the board. It's kind of a farce. I don't understand. The only explanation is malice at this point, why the polls are so wrong so frequently in the Democrats' favor. Malice by the pollsters, that is. But I've looked at many polls, and I've looked at many polls related to many events, and anything this shocking is going to inflame partisans. On both sides, that is. But the difference is the Democrat partisans, the ones who really hate Trump, I don't think they're going to be more likely to vote because of this. And in fact, my gut feeling going the next month or two is there won't be charges put. And there won't be anything that comes of this. There'll be some headlines, there'll be some talk, there'll be some posturing, but there won't be any reasonable... I don't believe there's any reasonable chance that Trump is going to be charged with anything, regardless of whether he did anything or not. He could have actually committed a crime. I don't think he'll be charged. Because the crime that he allegedly has committed is that, again, he had classified documents. Allegedly in an unsecure place, and the FBI wanted them and he wouldn't get them back. That's the allegations. Don't know how true it is. Don't care. Doesn't matter. The thing is, yes, that is a big crime, and if you or I were to do it, you would go to jail for a very long time. In fact, I don't know about the US protocols, but in Canada, writing down a top secret password is a crime. And you would get in serious trouble, probably lose your job, and probably face prison time for writing down a top secret password, let alone taking a top secret document elsewhere. But the thing is, the way the political system works, for better or for worse, politicians do not face penalties. He very well, Trump that is, could have taken documents with him, kept them in his resort, and refused to give them back. That could have happened, sure. Let's assume it happened for sake of argument. He won't get charged. They could probably have evidence that he did it. He won't get charged. Because the thing is, none of them get charged. This isn't just Trump. Happened with Hillary, happens with all sorts of high-ranking members and organizations you can point to. I believe there's been CIA leaders or whatever they're called who've been caught doing the same thing. They don't charge each other. And the burden of charging them is really high. Because it's not even just insider, incestuous corruption from politicians not wanting to charge each other. And for the record, they don't want to charge each other not because they like each other. They don't want to charge each other because they're all doing it. They don't want to create the precedent that they're going to get charged for it because they're all doing it. Same thing with a lot of insider trading things that pretty much everyone in Parliament in Canada does and most people in Congress do. They all do it. They don't want to criminalize it because if they criminalize it, they're all in deep shit. That's the deal there, right? So he's not going to get charged because they don't want to get the precedent for it, first. And second, even if they did, the burden of proof and to get that conviction and not ruin the country is really high. Because it's not just that you have to prove in a court of law that he did the crime. You have to convince his supporters that what his crime was bigger than other people's crimes. Notably, and poignantly, they have to convince Trump's supporters that whatever Trump did, if he in fact did it, is a worse thing than what Hillary did with her email server. If they cannot press that bar and really show publicly, without a shadow of a doubt, that this is the case, it would be insane to prosecute. Even if he did it. Even if he committed a crime. Even if he had top secret documents naming every single spy that the U.S. has in China in plain text with all their aliases, and it was just sitting there on his coffee table. Even if something that egregious, they probably wouldn't press charges. Because the thing is, with high-level politicians, it's not just about did they commit the crime, especially ones who are extremely popular among their base, such as Trump, or, in fact, Hillary in 2016, she was quite popular among Democrat voters. The burden isn't they did the crime. The burden is you can convince their supporters that they committed the crime to such a degree that it's worth charging them when no one else gets charged for it. Now, in a perfect world, people would be charged for these crimes. And again, I'm not saying Trump did it because I don't know and I don't care. But that's not what the world we live in. They haven't been charged for these crimes. So to start now on such a high-level individual, a former president, you couldn't do it. It won't happen. And if it does happen, expect things to go bad. There's a reason why Trump, when he had the presidency, when he had the Senate, when he had the Congress, did not try to prosecute Hillary for the email server. There's a reason for that, and it's the same reason. She committed the crime, objectively. No shadow of a doubt. She had an email server with confidential and classified documents on it, which is illegal. She did that. No doubt. Unprosecutable. Because it's not that you have to prove she did it. You have to prove that what she did was worse and more damaging than what every other politician in her position has done. We've gone so far and so long in Western countries and just not prosecuting politicians, the burden to prosecute is nearly impossibly high. In fact, I might even go so far as to say, I don't think you could prosecute a politician short of capital murder. You couldn't do it. So where does that leave us? Well, the Democrats who really, really hate Trump and have been celebrating the news of this raid and potential gossip of an indictment, they're going to be crestfallen and abashed because it won't happen. There won't be charges pressed. Because the burden of proof is too high to do it in reality. It's too damaging socially to prosecute such a high-level political figure, even if they did the crime. So the Democrat voters who might be really excited right now for it and might be reflecting in the polls in the near future, come October, when no charges have been pressed, they'll be crestfallen and they will feel defeated. Oh, we couldn't even get it with this. Oh, what's the point? That's what's going to happen. On the flip side, you're already seeing with Republican voters, they're incensed. Because the important thing, too, is right now, when we really have no concrete evidence of anything, we have allegations, but again, nothing shown in a court of law yet, or nothing proven in a court of law yet. Pretty much every single Republican who matters doesn't believe this. And since they don't believe it, in reality, or in effect to them, the allegations are nothing. And the raid, as a result, is a witch hunt. And when you persecute somebody, their beliefs get stronger. For Democrats and the Biden administration, in the coldest, bitterest teacup of reality, this raid on Mar-A-Lago, this martyring of Trump to Republicans, not only has likely won Trump the primary, if he puts his head in the ring, it will likely win Trump the election in 2024. When we're in our 90s, given the demographic age people watch my channel, people are going to look back at this and they're like, oh, this was the biggest mistake the Democrats made. It has no upsides to them. None. There's no meaningful way they can prove in a court of law so concretely that Republicans will believe them. So even if they get a conviction, it'll get appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, and very likely the Supreme Court will overturn it. But even if they uphold it, what you will have done is not only jade the Republicans and Republican supporters and people who like Trump, which, if we just assume based off of 2020 numbers, is 77 million people. If we assume all of them get jaded and upset with the system, not just on the legislative level, which they already are. Everyone in the U.S. hates the legislative level because the legislature sucks. They're corrupt and they're worthless, Democrat and Republican alike. You look at the most recent Inflation Reduction Act, and it's basically just the politicians giving themselves money. Oh, great. We're going to spend money and give ourselves money. Woohoo. Corrupt fucks, whatever. The legislature's already basically a write-off. Republicans still have trust in the Supreme Court. The Democrats, they don't trust anymore after Roe, even though, technically speaking, the Supreme Court did nothing wrong there. But anyways, the Democrats don't trust the Supreme Court anymore. The Republicans really haven't trusted the administrative agencies probably since the 90s on like a grassroots level, since Waco and Ruby Ridge. But on a political level, the thought leaders and the commentators, basically, the administrative agencies are complete write-off now. They're unsalvageable. There's already calls going to abolish things like the FBI, and things like abolishing the Department of Education and ATF have been very common for probably more than a decade now. So what we have left, effectively, in a best case scenario, if Trump is actually prosecuted and convicted and it's upheld all the way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court upholds it, barring the ability to convince Republicans that what Trump did is worthy of punishment, is the basis for civil conflict. Because you will have proven to 77 million Americans the system doesn't work. Now, I don't think it's going to go there. I will be stupefied if charges even get pressed. Early yet, maybe they will. Maybe they'll double down. I'll be even more surprised if charges stick. Either through the jury or even the mere fact that it'll get appealed to the Supreme Court, almost certainly. And I don't think the conservative Supreme Court in the U.S. will convict or will uphold the ruling. But we'll see. But what is to say is, barring some shocking development that I cannot predict, I think it is safe to say that this event is going to energize the Republicans and demoralize the Democrats more than anything else. People will say the other way around, but no. Failure to get a conviction, failure to defend Roe, failure to even manage the economy, blow after blow after blow. The Democrats right now have no path to victory themselves in the congressional election. And likely, I haven't been following the Senate races too closely at the moment because it's still early, waiting till the primaries are done, but it's very likely that a bunch of Senate races, such as Nevada and New Hampshire, could easily go Republican. And even just 2 Senate races going Republican likely would mean they will take a majority of the Senate. Because only one Republican held Senate seat, sort of. The Pennsylvania one, that's the only one that looks possibly at risk. And I say sort of held because the Republican incumbent is retired. That's the only one that really looks at risk at the moment. All the other ones look like they'll probably be safe for elections, and at least New Hampshire and Nevada look competitive. And there's more, or 2, but those are the 2 I've been looking at the most, so there might be others. I've heard some people suggesting one of the Georgia ones is competitive. I haven't looked into it. But that'll come more later once all the primaries are done and we get closer to actual election day. I'll start doing some stuff on particular Senate races. They're much easier to forecast, actually, than congressional races, because the Senate race, I won't get into it, but the Senate races are much easier to forecast. It's like gubernatorial races. If you go back last year to the Virginia gubernatorial race, that was really easy on my part to forecast. And I was right. Most people were wrong. Maybe I'm actually pretty good at this. Huh. Who would have thought? But enough tooting my own horn. I will wrap this up here and just say, generally speaking, status quo in seats. The Democrats look like they might be slowly making some gains back up in the House in the middle of the summer. The polls are slightly favoring them in the raw totals, though you start looking at some of them in a lot of the YouGov polls, for example, and the Democrat lead evaporates because they undersample Republicans like crazy. But ignoring stuff like that, I don't think Democrat lead will hold into September or October. And I think pretty much every single recent event in the U.S. is hurting the Democrats. People don't want to acknowledge it, but it is. But with that, I mean, if you disagree with me, by all means, comment below. I love any and all comments. Even, I mean, at least I get a chuckle at the ones that attack me. So you throw those too. Throw them my way. Any ones that actually want to seriously discuss the model or just have other discussions, by all means, I will engage with them to the best of my ability. I can't comment, I won't reply necessarily to every one of them because I might not have anything to say. But as long as there's something to say, I will reply, and I definitely read all of them. If you want to stay up to date with stuff I do, you can follow me on Twitter, and if you really want to support the channel more than anything else, by all means, if you're not pressed the subscribe button, press that subscribe button. It really helps out. You'd be surprised how much that one button means to the YouTube algorithm gods. But, and with that, I will wrap this up and be very happy because 2 a.m. recording sucks. See you tomorrow.